Hey, what's up? This is Jason, and today I'm going to show you how you can speed up your recording and mixing time with templates and channel strip settings in Logic Pro X. Alright, let's get started with how you can speed up your recording and mixing time by using templates and channel strip settings in Logic Pro X. So the last video that I showed, I did a quick recording of just the drums for the Alesis Strike Pro, and I'll just show you how to set up those projects, set up all of your defaults, map all of your inputs, and create some basic custom plugin settings based on, I typically use the same plugins over and over again, so I start with the default from there. It's usually a pretty good mix already out of the box, and then I just tweak it based on trying to make it fit the style of the song. So when you open up Logic, you can choose the number of tracks that you want to start off with. So because the Alesis Strike Pro has a discrete output for kick, snare, hi-hat, and ride, and then stereo output for the cymbals and the toms, there's going to be 6 tracks that I'm going to use. So it'll set those up automatically, and then go in, relabel the tracks. And it's important to do this for any type of recording that you're doing. One of the songs that we were working on, we ended up experimenting with about 20 different guitar tracks, and I'm left with a mess of audio 1 through 20 to try to figure out which ones are which. So take a little bit of extra time and set this stuff up so it's a lot easier to find all of your different parts later. The cool thing with, this isn't really a necessary step, but a cool thing that you can do with Logic, and probably any DAW, is you can have custom icons for each of these things. And so if you really want to have pictures of your own drums in those settings, you can do that too. And I just did that for the drum bus. So now that all of the tracks are here and listed, it's a good idea to group these to a summing track. So in Logic Pro X and probably every other DAW out there, you can go to track and create a track stack or a summing track. There's a few different ways you can do this. Logic does it pretty easy, so I create a track stack, and you have options to use a folder or a summing track. It'll give you the details for each one. And the folder stack, really what it does is it just groups things together, so you can control the volume, you can solo and mute all of the tracks that are within that folder. The summing track is actually a mix bus, so it outputs all of the individual tracks to a summing track. So you can do more things like add an effect to the whole kit if you want. The folder tracks won't allow you to do that because it's still going to route the signals through the stereo output. So if I create the summing track here and open up the mixer, Logic automatically changes the routing for these to bus number 1, which is the summing track. So you can change the name of that as well. And then, like I mentioned, I've got of course, got the little custom icon there for the Strike Pro kit. So now that that's all set up, you can leave this as a base if you want, but a couple of extra things that'll help you save a little bit time later on is to make sure you map all the inputs. So the input 1 is the kick, and then the snare, I typically have everything set up the exact same way every time because I leave the Strike Pro kit plugged in permanently. When I play live, I use my acoustic kit, so I haven't played live with the Strike Pro kit yet. Now, since the toms and the cymbals are stereo in Logic, you just have to change the channel mode to stereo for both of these, and then now I can select the input 5 and 6, which is what the toms are routed through, and then inputs 7 and 8 that the cymbals are mapped through. So that's a good enough base template. It's a great place to start from if you want to start with a completely clean file that's set up and ready to go. So I will just save this as a drum preset, which I already created, so I'll just replace that. And then now, if I close this project down and then create a new project from a template, I've got the drum set up here, and then here you can go ahead and you map your tempo, set your key, whatever you want, your input and output device, and pick that template, and whammo, everything is done and set up automatically, and literally all you have to do is arm this beast for recording, and you are good to go. So the next thing that makes it a little bit easier to get started with, as I mentioned, I typically use the same kit in the Strike Pro, at least for the first batch of songs that we're working on. and you can save those as channel strip settings. So in here, you can see I've got a whole bunch in here from some of the previous songs, and there's a bunch that I've got labeled by instrument. So down here, if I wanted to start with the meaty sounding snare or the more airy sounding snare, you can pick that, and then Logic will automatically add whatever plugins that you had, and everything like that is all set automatically. So that makes it a lot easier when you want to get started with a sound. And I'm going to go ahead and close this project. I don't want to save that. And I'm going to open up the last project with just the basic Alesis Strike recording video that I did last time. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like right now. So that's using the meaty sounding snare, and what I did for this one is use the Steven Slate plugins, which I find give you kind of a warmer sound, and boosted all the frequencies, set the compression fairly high, and then used this Revival plugin with the Slate plugins and added some thickness to give it a thicker, more kind of well-rounded sound. And the other setting that I had on here was just routing it through the Verb Suite Classics Pro and giving it a nice plate reverb, and that's turned off right now. So if I So Logic is going to set all of these presets based on what you had saved. So any sends that you're doing, it's going to save those as well, and then it's pretty easy to switch back and forth if you want to just experiment with different sounds once you've got all of the other instruments sorted out. So let's switch these back and forth. So it's easy to switch back and forth. The last one I switched to, obviously I'd want to do some tweaking there because you can hear a lot of the clipping that's going on in the background. But it makes it so much easier to go ahead and get started with some of your default sounds. You can also set the same thing for the drum kit as well. So I'm going to put this back to the snare that doesn't sound like crap. And let's turn on and off the effects that are on the kit. So I wanted to give this kind of a natural drum room sound. Obviously, if you're recording with eDrums, the thing you're going to miss, obviously, are the overhead mics and getting a nice warm sound from the room. So you can simulate it with these plugins. The Verb Suite Classics plugin is a fantastic plugin from the Everything bundle from Steven Slate. So you can set, what I like about this one is, you know, I've only been recording for just over a year, but it doesn't force you to learn everything about being a recording engineer. You know, it's pretty easy to go here and say, oh, that's going to sound warm because it says warm, or this is going to do a stereo pan because it's wide or dark or bright, which is pretty cool. So you don't really have to worry too much about knowing everything about all the different frequencies. But this particular plugin here gives you a ton of options for creating different types of rooms. You can add these to the individual tracks themselves or the summing track for the drums. So I just tried to create as natural and warm of a drum room as I could for this one. And then now I can save this channel strip as, which I've already done, natural drum room. And then it's always a good idea to name what kit you were using on the Strike Pro, because I learned this lesson the hard way. I started recording one of our songs and then I couldn't remember what kit setting I used. So I tweaked a bunch of stuff, and then I wanted to try to have a consistent sounding kit from song to song that are going to be on the EP, and I just basically had to do it all over again because I didn't go ahead and name these things properly. So it's a very good idea to keep track of that stuff or use a notepad. I'm going to be doing a future video on a bunch of lessons learned after recording with the Strike Pro kit for a full EP and then using Logic Pro X as well. So that is a pretty simple and easy way to set up your drums and to get started with recording much faster. And then obviously the same thing applies for all of your instruments. So if I was going to open up my blank drum preset template again and creating one for the whole band, it's easy to do. I mean, it's a home studio, so all I do is I have everything through input number 1 for all of the instruments. And of course, everybody's got their little custom icon. And name these things easily. They're all going to be mapped to input 1 for all of the string instruments. It's only in a rare case if we can actually get everybody in the studio at the same time that I'll have to remap that stuff. So if I set that up now, it's easy enough to do. But it's a good practice also to adjust the channel strip colors, so it's a lot easier to see when you're mixing a track that has lots of different tracks on it. So in Logic Pro X there is a shortcut, so you don't have to keep going through this, and you hold Command and press D, and that's going to duplicate the track, and then all I got to do is pick the other guitar player. Okay, so I think you get the idea. This is where it becomes important. So this is one of the songs from our upcoming EP. We've got 41 tracks here in total, and it can be pretty difficult to just find your way through this thing pretty quickly. And in a future video, I'm going to show some of the tips that I learned over recording for the last year. And one of the tips I'm going to go through is just finding your style. So what I found was by doing submixes and setting things up this way, being able to group things by different types of backing vocals. So I've got 6 summing tracks for all of the vocals, plus everything for the guitars and bass rolling up to one summing track, and then the drums as well. That worked better for me, so when I'm doing just the final tweaking for the mixing and mastering, I can just solo.
Wait around waiting patiently, cause she looking for a dose and no begging, please. Yeah, wait a minute, ma. Hey, mama. She said, who?
So I find it a lot easier to just work with individual submixes. So being able to organize things by summing tracks gives you a lot more freedom with how you're setting individual plugins and settings and effects for each of the tracks. And then it's way easier to manage and find things a lot faster. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and in an upcoming one I'm going to show some other tips and tricks that I learned over recording with the Alesis Strike Pro and just overall in Logic Pro X. Thanks for watching.